what? If that's how I go down, bad joke teller, fair enough. Cool. We are going to have a really good speaker today and give the senator the floor. But before I do, I want to read Senator Tim Knopp's bio. Tim Knopp is a native Oregonian who has lived in Central Oregon for over 40 years. He and his wife Melissa have been married over 35 years, have 4 children and 3 grandchildren. I heard nothing about chickens, dogs, and other animals, but his background includes nearly 20 years as a small business owner, community service as a former Little League coach, board member of the Bend Chamber of Commerce, as well as serving as a current board member of affordable housing for nonprofit First Story. Tim is the Executive Vice President of the Central Oregon Builders Association and the Executive Director of Building Partners for Affordable Housing. Tim previously served in the legislature from 1999 to 2005 for 3 terms, including 1 as House Majority Leader. He led the PERS reform of 2003 that saved taxpayers billions. Moreover, Tim helped pass legislation protecting the kicker by putting it in the Constitution, where it has returned over $7 billion belonging to the taxpayers. He's been a champion for small business and job creation. Tim was elected to his first term in the Oregon State Senate in November of 2012, elected Deputy Republican Leader in 2014, and elected Senate Minority Leader in 2021. Senate District 27 encompasses Central Oregon communities of Bend, Redmond, Tumalo, Sisters, Black Butte, Eagle Crest, and parts of rural Deschutes County. Please welcome Senator Tim Knopp. Hopefully I got all that right.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's very exciting to be back with you. I was at the Redmond Kiwanis years ago and had the opportunity to speak with you all, and so it's fun to be back. I will say, I don't know if guests get to do happy dollars, but so we got one of the cutest grandkids ever. His name is Callahan, and he is amazing. We had the opportunity to spend 4th of July with him, and he got to see his first fireworks. So that was good. So I can definitely donate. So and I've got more. So
keep it up.
So yeah, exactly. So we have a granddaughter named Maggie, and Maggie ended up falling and chipping a tooth. But the happy part was no permanent damage, so that was good. So those baby teeth are going to fall out someday, and she'll get permanent ones. So crisis averted. So that's good. And then we have a 4.5-year-old grandson. So we've got 3, and he is just an amazing talker. So my son, who has the 2 of the 3 grandkids, said they were on their way home, and the grandkids just wanted to call and say hi to Grandpa. So that's always nice. So that makes you feel good. So I think I owe you guys some happy dollars. So I gotta add to the pot here. We'll just throw it. We'll just throw it to 5. How about that?
Appreciate that.
Yeah. And I could keep going. Happy that the legislature is done for this long session. So. But the legislature this session was interesting, probably more interesting than most. And part of the change was that we had a lot of new leaders that were coming in. And so we had a new Senate president, and we had a newer speaker. He'd been there, I think, a term. And then, so I was new to being the minority leader in the Senate, and then we had a new minority leader in the House as well. And so lots of change there. And in the 22 election cycle, the partisan makeup of the legislature came down to 3,000 votes. So, and in 2 different seats. So essentially, if 1,500 people had voted differently, it would have been a 15-15 tie. And so I reminded my Democrat colleagues of that, and I said, yeah, but if 8,000 people had voted differently, we'd have 20, which is a quorum-proof majority. And so I said, and that's right. And how the session goes will depend on your attitude. So is your attitude that it's fairly even, or is your attitude that, you know, we could have been in the super majority? Well, unfortunately, after the first few weeks, they chose the path of, we believe we're in the super majority, we're going to do what we want, we're not going to negotiate with you, and that became a problem. But the positive parts were, in the beginning, we did some great stuff on semiconductor expansion in terms of jobs in the Silicon Forest, which affects all of Oregon, but it's really important that we invest in and bring in federal dollars into our state that helps us expand the job market and the production of semiconductor research, development, and manufacturing. And then we were able to do a lot on homelessness. So those were both very bipartisan. There were several initiatives that were passed, and those were, I think, incredibly positive. And there were other things that ultimately passed too, I think, that were very bipartisan. And I know the club here is very interested in things that have impacted kids. And so one of the things that I think will be incredibly positive is that there's an early learning reading initiative that passed, was super important. And you know, getting the kids early, getting them to be able to read. And I don't know about you guys, but you know, I struggled to read when I was in second, third grade, and it's critically important that we have the opportunity to invest in kids to help them make a difference, because those benchmarks that determine success for kids in many cases is, are they reading by the third grade, and are they going to graduate high school? Those two things are bigger determinants of where kids will end up in our society than almost anything. And so we thought that that was exceptional to be able to get that program started. Also, two other programs. One was parents as caregivers for disabled children. We were able to continue a program that was started at the federal level and was essentially going to go away. And it was started during COVID, but what we found was that there was a better outcome, and there were really no one to care for these disabled kids, because as you guys know, if you are in the business world at all, you know that everybody needs employees that will show up for work. And it is an employee's market, and so wages have steadily risen to the point where the really difficult jobs are hard to fill. And so in this case, it is a caregiver issue, and it was during COVID. And so the federal government stepped in, put some money toward parents as caregivers, so essentially paying parents to take care of significantly disabled kids. And so we found that they had better health outcomes, less expense at the emergency room and so on, but also coming out of COVID, there was literally no one to replace those parents as caregivers. And so we invested some money in that particular program. I wanted to do more, but at least we got that going. And then I don't know if you guys are aware of child advocacy centers, but we have a really good child advocacy center here in Central Oregon. It's called the Kids Center. And they're throughout the state. There's roughly about 30 of them. And we were able to get some funding right at the end of session for them. During a period of COVID where abuse went up significantly, there was an investment by the state, and the state wasn't going to continue that investment, but we were able to not only continue that investment, but enhance that. And so I think those were significant wins for kids in the state budget. And then, of course, in terms of funding for K-12 education, have the strongest funding package for K-12 ever in the state of Oregon at about $10.2 billion. And so I think significant investments there as well. But as I said, the session started out kind of bipartisan, but kind of devolved. And the breaking point really was one of our staff people found out that the bill summaries on every single bill were not meeting state law. And who would have thought? If you had delved into the rules and the law, you would have known this. But even our legislative council was unaware. And so we have this law that says that all the summaries on bills need to be at basically an 8th grade reading level or a 60 on the Flesch-Kincaid reading scale. And like 98% of bills were not. It didn't matter, Democrat bill or Republican bill. Didn't matter. And so we brought this up as an issue. And the majority said, well, we have the votes, we can do what we want. And we was like, we don't think so. So, because it violated Senate rules and it violated state law. And we said, we will help you try to get those fixed. And they said, no. Their take is when we vote for the bills, they become legal. And I was like, except for the law and the rules, sure. So, so that created a problem. And we said, you're going to have to fix it. And they're like, no, we're not going to fix it. And so we had that argument. And that essentially started the walkout that lasted for about 43 days. So longest walkout in Oregon history, second longest in the United States. The longest, just in case you're interested, for those who like to be number one, was the Rhode Island Senate Republicans in 1924, who left for 6 months. And if you go look at this in Ballotpedia or somewhere, you'll find that somebody let off literally a gas bomb in the Senate chamber, and both sides accuse each other of doing it. And I was like, isn't it nice that we're only using words and that we're disagreeing verbally? And somehow people think that our society today is pretty violent and things like that. And I'm like, 1924 in Rhode Island, that's pretty violent. So we were shocked by that, of course. But the Democrat majority essentially said, we're not going to negotiate with you, and we're going to do what we want as it relates to the law and the rule on these issues. And we said, well, we don't think you are. And so thus the walkout begins, and it took roughly, I'd say about 30-ish days before they decided they wanted to negotiate, and that was our goal, because I said you can't be unlawful, you can't be unconstitutional, and you can't be uncompromising. Those three things don't work for us. And the people of Oregon, more than anything, want bipartisanship. And we started the session in a bipartisan way, and there's no reason it had to devolve into extreme partisanship. And so, through the walkout, we were able to get negotiations going, and the governor tried her hand at it, and leaders tried their hand at it, and other people tried their hand at it. Apparently, I'm pretty tough, and so eventually we found some common ground, and we're able to find a deal that worked for everybody. And so we were able to come back in about the last 10 days of session and passed a lot of bills, several hundred bills in the last 10 days. And a lot of those good things that I talked about were some of the things that passed in the last 10 days. And so, I would say the session, although it's, some people would say, well, it was, it was rough, and it was, it was kind of difficult, and people weren't really getting along. In the end, we were able to find some pretty good bipartisanship, and we got a lot of things passed. And I said to my my Democrat colleagues that we simply are not going to be a speed bump on the road to your you're essentially a very national, progressive left agenda, which is what it was. And well, they said, but we're in control, and I was like, you have the majority, but you're actually not in control because we control whether or not you have a quorum. And so you're going to have to include us at some point if you want to have a session that works for everybody. And ultimately, they decided that they would rather do that than not. And so, I think it worked well. So we were able to get some funding for local priorities that were pretty important. So we got money for the courthouse, and we got money for some items in La Pine, and got money for the Hawthorne Crossing. And some of you know about the Redmond North Point housing project. I think we got $8 or $9 million for that. And so just, a lot of good things. The list is actually pretty long. And we got a lot of good bills passed, and a lot of bipartisan bills. And so, I think that was really a lesson for everyone that I hope will be taken to heart, and that we'll be able to work with each other if we should have a short session. And I say if, I was like, nothing is guaranteed, because so the Senate president tried to drive a very quick count on unexcused absences for our members. So 11 Republicans, 12 Republicans, one of which caucuses with the independents. And there's only one independent. So 11 and 2, 13. So the 13 of us decided that we would work together, and we would make sure that we got our point across, and they stuck together through 43 days, and were ultimately able to, I think, come up with a lot of bipartisanship. And so our caucus, the Senate Republican caucus, was one of the only caucuses that published an actual agenda with bill numbers. Normally when caucuses publish their agenda, it's a value statement about, we care about kids, and we care about education, and we care about seniors, and stuff like that. But we are very specific. And as I said to my Democrat colleagues, I said, so you guys killed all 37 bills on our agenda, every single one. The only one that was actually passing, and you guys may have seen or heard about this relatively early on in the legislature, was the most bipartisan bill of the session. And I got all 29 other senators, so 30 of us, to sign on as sponsors to a bill that did not allow the state to pay for employees who chose to live outside the state, so public employees who chose to live outside the state. The bill would have prohibited the state from reimbursing them for travel back to Oregon to do their job. Because I don't care where you want to live, but that is your choice. And if you choose not to live in Oregon, I don't think taxpayers should be paying for you to come back to go to work when you have to do that. And so that the bill passed unanimously. I think it was 29-0 out of the Senate, went over to the House, and just as it was coming up for a hearing, the governor said, hey, I'm going to change that policy from the executive branch level. And so that ended up killing my bill. And they did ask, I will say, they did ask, do you need your bill? And I was like, no, I have about 400 bills to my credit over the 17 years that I've served in the legislature, so I don't need another one. So that's my alarm that tells me that I'm doing overtime here. The upshot of it was like, I don't need the bill, I just want to make sure the policy is right. And so the governor agreed to do that, and I believe she will follow through with it. And so we didn't end up getting that bill. So literally all 37 bills on our agenda died at that point. And through negotiations, we were able to revive many of those bills. One of the bills that we revived was increasing the statute of limitations on the time frame for which somebody can report rape and sexual assault. And so years ago, I worked on this issue, and we moved it from 6 years, the statute of limitations, from 6 years to 12 years, and we just moved it from 12 to 20. And most states in the country have either a 20-year limit or have unlimited for statute of limitations on these sex crimes. And part of the reason for that is because sometimes it takes people a really long time to be able to essentially come up with and express or feel safe enough to the point where they can talk about the crime that was committed against them. And then it's whether or not the evidence exists, left to be able to charge somebody and convict them. And so, I thought that was a big win because that bill was killed fairly early on in the Senate. And there were others too that we ended up getting revived. And I actually haven't done the count yet on the 37 of how many we actually did get, but it was several. And so, that was positive, from the walkout as well. And so I think there were many positive things that happened because of that. And, I could probably talk for the rest of the afternoon. I was told that I can talk as long as I want, but you guys are leaving at 1. So, which is all good. But I want to give you guys the opportunity to ask questions because to me that's more important. I want to, talk about and answer things that you guys actually care about. And so, please feel free to ask questions. Yes, sir.
On the topic of homelessness,
Yes.
I think we're all aware that you attend meetings, you take part in discussions. As a Deschutes County, where do you think we're at right now and going forward?
Well, so the issue obviously is just not Deschutes County, but we definitely have a significant issue here. People read and see a lot of stuff about kind of the 3 major cities, Portland, San Francisco, and Seattle, tend to be the ones that stand out. But we literally have homelessness in basically every nook and cranny of Oregon. And it exists here in Central Oregon in a pretty significant way. And there's a couple of things that I think we're going to have to do to make significant headway. When you talk to law enforcement, what they will tell you is that 70 to 80% of homelessness is driven by addiction. And so drug and alcohol addiction, and I think Oregon made a mistake in legalizing hard drugs. And we created some penalties for fentanyl, which is kind of the newest of the drugs that is a problem, and it's a huge problem because in very small quantities it kills. But there's heroin and just all kinds of hard drugs that essentially Measure 110, which did pass, allowed to become legal to carry personal use. And then if you are caught with those drugs, if law enforcement won't even do it anymore, they would give you a ticket for a phone number you could call for help. And that was essentially the penalty. That's not working. And I was pretty sure that wasn't going to work. And unfortunately, I was right. And so we're going to have to reverse that policy in a pretty significant way. Because having the penalty for those crimes was what forced people to get into treatment, even if they didn't want to go. And people know that if you've had drug addiction in your family or alcohol addiction, people don't, let's just say, they don't beat that addiction until they want to, right? And so they can go into treatment multiple times. But quite frankly, in most cases, it is cheaper for them to go into treatment multiple times than it is to just let them spiral. Because it ends up in homelessness and crime and all kinds of negative things that we don't like. And so where are we? I think we're at the beginning stages of trying to reverse it. But there's things that are going to happen in order to reverse it. One of those is housing supply. And I think that's what our short session, should we have one, should be about, is creating more supply of housing, because I don't think the new compassion for Oregon should be, here's your tent, there's a sidewalk. And that's what is being allowed right now. And we need to find places for people. That's compassion, is finding a roof for everybody, to have for them and their family. And so one of the things I liked was a bill that's called Home Share. And so in Oregon, I think the number is there's over 1 million bedrooms that are available in all of our houses at any given time. And so this bill was essentially an incentive for a willing person that wants to rent to somebody and a willing person who wants to take a room to be able to do that. They get connected up through a program called Home Share. And you would get a tax write-off for the income that you received from doing that. In other words, a carrot, an incentive. And so, you know, obviously you may not want somebody who's going through the throes of drug addiction or whatever to be in your house, but there are lots of people that are still homeless, including kids, who, you know, need a place. And so there are opportunities out there, and we need to have significant more investment in that, but we also have to get to the drug and crime issue, but, you know, both go together. I saw a hand go up in the back there. Yeah.
So with housing, concern I see is the regulations in this state that are capping rental increases now to 10%, and other things along those lines that make it so it's really hard for somebody to want to invest in housing in this state. And even being a landlord, another thing that really bothers people long term is the cost incurred from not being able to screen people by pets anymore. And this is a weird thing that people don't understand, that if somebody says they've got a service animal and then you say you need to provide proof, it's a HIPAA violation, so they can't. So people can literally fill the house full of dogs and you can't do anything about it. And then $10,000 later, we wonder why people aren't renting things. And it's like, it's a big problem, big problem. People don't understand why the divesting is so crazy, but like, what do you guys, it's getting worse every day. And what you're saying is, it's hollow if these things don't get fixed, because there'll be no private investment.
Yeah, so that sounds like a floor speech I gave. On Senate Bill 611, which is the rent cap, essentially at 10%. And that is exactly right. So the majority Democrats doubled down on their policy, which essentially is going to mean less investment in Oregon, especially for multifamily. And I mean, I gave almost that exact speech about how you're basically hurting the very people that you're trying to help. Because if you can't, so the cap was about 14%. If you can't afford a 14% increase, you can't afford a 10% increase, which is what they decided they wanted to go to. But furthermore, because you've created those caps, you're basically forcing landlords to raise rents where they otherwise wouldn't have. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy to try to get after, let's say, a bad actor who raised the rent 30% or 25% or what have you, because they could. And I said, why can't they? I said, it's because that person doesn't have 4 or 5 places that they could go. In other words, there is no supply, and you don't suspend the law of supply and demand. And we have a lot of demand, and we don't have enough supply. And therefore, you have an imbalance in the market. So what happens? Rents are going to go up no matter what. That is literally what the law of supply and demand does. And so the demand is not going away, especially here in Central Oregon, because we know a lot of people want to live here. And so I gave that an exact speech. They ended up passing it. It was a very partisan vote. And I said, the bill that you really want is a bill that increases supply, which died on the last day of session. And the governor wants to bring back in the short session, and we'd be happy to help with that. But you're right; those things need to be fixed. And landlords and people who are renting places can't be the enemy. They are people who are literally sacrificing their retirements, because a lot of these people have their retirements tied up in rentals. And so when they can't get their rent, that causes problems for them as well, because many people have mortgages on their rental properties as well. And so, again, it's all about balance, and there isn't balance in the market today. Yes, sir.
I wonder if you could talk a little more about the early learning investment. We've tried to support early learning here in this club and so on. And what we find are things like lack of teachers, lack of support, How is the bill going to help take care of some of those issues?
Yeah, so there's going to be millions of dollars worth of investment, and some of that is going to be in raising pay for people who want to teach and be staff in early learning facilities, because one of the things we found is that you're going to have to essentially raise pay more in order for you to attract people to work in some of these areas. And so Central Oregon, I'm not sure the exact number, we could look it up, but the bill was done by and championed by one of my, we call them seatmates. And so for every Senate district, there's 2 House members. And my House members are Jason Knopp and Emerson Levy. And so Jason was the lead on this particular bill, did a good job, and was able to get $115 million to make a difference. So focusing on reading for early learning, focusing on raising pay for people who want to teach and be involved in that. And ultimately that's going to affect thousands of kids here in Central Oregon. And I think in a very positive way, and give them a good start to getting into school here and becoming avid readers that ultimately are going to be successful. Yes, sir.
Yeah. My sense is from what you said, what I've read is both parties have been able to come together around, to some degree, more easily around the unhoused issue, the homelessness issue. But as an adjunct to that or an overlay to that, what's the one thing you think could be done to make this a more bipartisan, lack of partisanship in the legislature?
Well, I mean, ultimately what's driving the partisanship is closed primaries. In the most Oregonians that are registered non-affiliated, and some of those people used to be in one or the other party, and they kind of got fed up with their party for certain reasons, and then some people just register non-affiliated. Now we have motor voter, where if you don't pick a party, you automatically get registered as a non-affiliated voter. So if those people don't get an opportunity to participate in the primary, you're going to continue to get the very, kind of far left, far right candidates that are coming out. And so, I think that's an issue that Oregon is going to have to deal with. And the parties don't like it. I just tell you, they just don't. Because the people who are involved in the party are kind of party peers. And so they want somebody who agrees with them 100% of the time. And it's like, well, that's not really what happens in the legislature. And so, people ask about the session, and I said, well, everybody got some of what they wanted, and everybody got some of what they didn't want. And that's the way it works. And people say, well, how do you know when you've gotten to a good deal? When everybody's mad. Pretty much. And we got there. So there you go. But I mean that's a big part of what is driving.
The likelihood of that happening.
That's right. Ultimately it's going to happen. You know why it's going to happen?
Why?
Is because more and more people are. So it used to be that Democrats had the majority in some districts and Republicans had the majority in other districts. Now the majority is held by non-affiliates in almost every district in the state. And as that continues to happen, they're going to demand that they have access to primaries. And so at some point it will happen. I don't think it will happen with the acceptance of the parties, but it's ultimately going to happen.
When you think about it, really should be illegal to not allow people to vote in the primaries because they won't choose a party.
Yeah, well, and that's the way it is. Right now. And I actually, so I went to the state central committee for the Republicans, and I gave an amazing speech, by the way, and basically advocated for us to open our primary in 2022, and it was rejected by just a few votes. But it is it is unfortunate that we don't allow people to be welcomed in to vote for our candidates in the primary. And so I think at some point that's going to happen, but its time has not yet come, but I think it will.
I come from the state of Michigan, that's an open primary where they can vote across lines, and you'd be amazed at how competitive the primaries are in those places. You get a lot of different viewpoints, and it's a healthy thing. It really is.
Did you have a question?
I did. How long do you think it'll take to overturn or whatever you have to with 110? Because I feel like Oregon has become extremely soft on crime, and we're seeing it all the way around. I mean, we're seeing people getting let out of jail with 5,000 fentanyl pills that could literally wipe out the entire Central Oregon.
Right.
And I agree. I think that goes hand in hand with the houseless issue and mental health issues that can stem from the drugs. And there's a lot of stuff that I feel like law enforcement is being handcuffed to not be able to do their jobs efficiently because Oregon's become so soft on law, on like holding people accountable for breaking the law.
Right. I think 2024 or the long session in 2025, but I think legislators need to hear from citizens about that issue, because a lot of people I think have buyer's remorse on this, because it was basically pitched as we're going to provide all this money to help people get over addiction, right? And who isn't for that? The problem is when you essentially legalize drugs, you get more people coming to Oregon so they can continue their habit unabated. There's no risk to them. Where are they living? Well, they're living on Hunnell Road. They're living out, here east of Redmond. I mean, they're living in parks, and they're living on sidewalks all throughout Oregon, and that is not compassion. And so, we need to make sure we're helping people. There's another question back here.
A little change of subject. Climate is changing. Storms are worse. We've got more fires. We've got more floods. We've got more droughts. Is there something we can do locally, or is there something the legislature can help us do locally to act locally? Because it's a global issue, but all we can do is act locally. What can we do locally in Oregon to take care of the environment?
So what I say is, so start at home, and so it starts with me, right? And so, I got a hybrid car, and so I have electric and gas, and it's great, especially when I'm in town here, because I just plug in and I literally never fill up. When I'm going on the road and stuff like that, I do have to fill up, and so I do that. And we were able to downsize our house, and I think that's a benefit. And the building code today we're probably in the top 5 in the nation in terms of energy efficiency and building code.
We don't require solar panels on new homes or new buildings of any sort.
Right. Well, we don't require solar panels, but they're ultimately, I think, is going to be essentially everything is pre-wired to be able to do it, and the energy companies, so whether you have Pacific Power or Co-op or what have you, they're creating both incentives to do it, and there are some incentives at the state level as well to be able to do it. But we are moving more efficiently and effective than almost any country, especially in the industrialized in the world. So if you want to know what the problem is as it relates to carbon, you don't have to look any further than China, who brings on a new coal-fired power plant almost every single week. And these aren't small, these are massive. And so the unfortunate part of this is not only do we have a global problem, but in terms of a global partner, China is not a good one as it relates to climate, because they are essentially wiping out all the gains, and America is one of the only countries that has actually taken its carbon output down significantly over the last, say, 10 years. There are other countries that have done it, but I think the U.S. has done a better job than almost any of the industrialized nations. So, but you identified something that I think is important, and we should all act. So, is it Ty?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Princeton gave Oregon's 5th district lines an F, saying that it's a gerrymandered district. What do you think the path forward is for having fair lines?
Yeah, so, I mean, no matter what system you have, there's always going to be partisanship as it relates to how you redistrict. So, many people have said, well, we should have an independent commission do it. Okay, but who appoints the independent commission, right? Is it the governor? Well, they're partisan. Is it the state legislature? Well, they're partisan. Yeah. So, do people run for election? Those would be partisan elections. I mean, so it's tough to try to drive that to not be partisan, because I've watched other states do it. I was involved with redistricting this last time. I voted against the plans, but just for the reason that you stated. But and I saw it very close up. But I don't know that we're ever going to take the partisanship out of drawing the lines. But does Redmond and, let's say, Lake Oswego have a lot in common, or Milwaukee, and crossing the mountains in order to encompass all that? I don't know. That didn't seem right to me. But the good news is we got a congresswoman from Happy Valley of all places, and she's doing a great job. So I don't know how we're going to resolve that necessarily, but I think it'll be a topic for discussion for probably the next 10 years until we have the next.
Well, some of these redrawn lines end up in court too, right?
They do, and they have. Yeah, and ours were challenged and or essentially upheld. So thank you all. It sounds like the hook is.
We have just a small gift for you. It's just a pen.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks. Appreciate it. All right, thank you all. I will not see you next week, so again, aloha. I'll send in the joke for actually the next 2 weeks, and I'll work harder on it. Have a great day. Thank you.